So we're on the rather extensive grounds of the former Florida Industrial School for Girls in Ocala. This is, or was, in an age when children were expected to behave and obey and act properly. When they did not, this is where they were brought. This was called the Florida Industrial School for Girls. It was established in the early 19th century, or I'm sorry, the early 20th century on these grounds. It's now a government complex. Behind us is a building which is on the National Register of Historic Places. It is called the East Hall of the Florida Industrial School for Girls. It's the area where, when the bad girls, quote unquote, would really act up and act bad, they would be stuck here. These were lockdown cells. This was essentially a jail for a prison. This was isolation. And I'm told they still have another area over here that exists to this day. There's an actual cell that you can see, but it's not open to the public, so we're not going to get to see it today. But again, this was the East Hall. This is where this happened, quote unquote, and it now holds the Marion County Museum of History, and we're going to go check that out right now. This area houses some very interesting artifacts, a lot of Paleo-Indian stuff, artifacts, flint, that sort of thing. Very interesting place, I tell you. And this tells a little bit about it. This was built by the WPA. I don't know why it says PWA, but it was WPA. During the Roosevelt administration. Just me. Okay, so this is the front area of it. Got your normal things for sale and that sort of thing. We're not going to see every little detail. We're just going to try to give an overview of what you can expect to see when you visit here. This shows some photographs from the Florida Industrial School for Girls in Ocala. In a time when children who acted out were known as delinquents. So they weren't like, criminals like what we have today, where they're actually out, stealing and robbing and killing and everything. It was just those kids would have been treated as adults and sent to an adult facility. So these girls were sent here because they acted out for whatever reason. Their parents were incapable or unwilling to deal with them. So and then this, I was told by one of the docents earlier that this area here, before they did the remodeling, house cells up and down either side of this hallway. It'd be a very angry, hostile, depressing, austere place to be. Not a happy place. Okay, so they have a pretty extensive Paleo-Indian collection here. By comparison, very extensive. Various scrapers. You got the ubiquitous dugout canoe remains that every good museum should have, and this one has theirs. So this was found in the Ocklawaha, not far from the Hutto Martin site, and nearby Lake Weir landing mounds. These sites are all known to archaeologists and scientists, etc., but the general public doesn't get to know about them unless you know someone or know how to find that information out. You're not gonna find it out. And these are various pottery shards. Of course, you have the arrowheads, which are ever present. Animal skulls, skeletons, corn things, more arrowheads. And this, the lady that showed me, the docent, this is her husband. She showed me around earlier. Very, very nice lady, very knowledgeable. This collection belonged to her husband. He found these nearby before Ocala was built up and plowed under. There would have been woods all over the place. There were burial mounds, temple mounds, etc. We're very near Silver Springs. Silver Springs, of course, would be a center for all springs in Florida would have been a center for Indian life. I mean, obviously everything revolves around water, everything. All mammals come to water, everything depends on water. So when you got the freshest water around, you know, it's not hard to figure out where you're gonna be. This tells some of the early and middle archaic periods. They've dated these accordingly. This talks about Marion County contact with conquistadors. Even though they're talking about Caroline and St. Augustine, they're also referencing the Ocala Indians, the Ocala Indians were here. And this shows where they would have been. Very near here. So these are all Acura and Ocala on either side of the river. And they would have all been the same people, just different political distinctions. As far as we know, they may not have been any different. And this place is well worth checking out. Very neat. This is one of my favorite things. The museum is this bas-relief of DeSoto. I dig that. I'm not touching it, but it looks like it's carved out of wood. But anyway. Here we have an atlati and spear. That's the throwing thing. You would hold that, notch this little end into the back of the spear, and it basically became a great big bow. Gave it a lot of extra force. I read a book one time when I was a child, and it talked about that. I mean, I was a very small kid when I read that book. And I don't even remember now what the name of it was, but it was some caveman thing. I'd love to find out about it, or, you know, find out the name of it. It wasn't a kid's book, but it wasn't a bestseller either. It was a book that a kid my age at that time could understand. So this all references the colonial period, the British period, Spanish periods, etc. And this talks about the Second Seminole War period. We're very, very near, a mile or less from the Fort King site. And the docent was telling me that at one point you could just, you know, put your shovel in the ground basically and scrape away some earth, and you would dig up artifacts. I mean, it was just, they were everywhere. He just talks about the treaties of Payne's Landing, Fort Drain, Wiley Brooks. Why does that name sound familiar? That name sounds very familiar to me. Historic Fort King Trail. Don't know why. Don't know why that sounds familiar. This is a war map. You can see how close the Ocklawaha and Withlacoochee are to each other. This is the cove of the Withlacoochee. And you can see there were major battles fought all around this area for this, you know, during the Second Seminole War. There were major forts here. Well, this was a supply fort, more or less. Fort Clinch, Huck, Drain, McCabe, McAnopie, on and on. I mean, there's just forts everywhere. And of course, Fort King was the epicenter, and you can see why. From that, the roads, all roads led to Fort King and from Fort King. So, and that's where Dade was heading towards during, on his journey when he was attacked, and his entire command, with the exception of a couple of guys, was wiped out. This is the Armed Occupation Act. This was after the undeclared end of the war, the unofficial end of the war. Congress said, basically, come on down. This is what you got to choose from. If you live here for this amount of time, then you can have this land basically for free. And a lot of people took them up on that. But you had to be a hardy sort of person to do that. I love dioramas. This is a really neat diorama of a homestead. This talks about the Confederacy, Marion County, and the war between the states. Sometimes called the War of Northern Aggression, the War for Southern Independence, and is commonly known as anything else, the Civil War. Got a real uniform here. That's astonishing. That should be behind glass. Here we have the Ocklawaha River steamboats, the Hart line. I've seen where Hart, he was out of Palatka, and I've seen where he's buried. He was a big deal in that area. Sure, that's not very far from here, so it would have been a big deal everywhere. Various tools, railroad spikes, the catfish tree, the big hurdy cup. An old wheelchair. And now we're starting to come into more of the 20th century. This is the early 20th century. And here again, we're just doing an overview. We're not, we're not going to reference every teeny little thing or be able to discuss in detail everything. This is the Depression and the Second World War. A lot of men from this area went to fight. A lot of WPA was WPA things, projects were made here. This is all 6-gun territory. If you know the area, this 6-gun territory was a very, very, very famous, popular theme park. It was a theme park pre-Disney, and this is where you would have just really had an amazing time. This was, as the name suggests, 6-gun territory. It was a Western themed place. This talks about Paradise Park, which in the age of segregation was an area for blacks to be able to enjoy the springs at Silver Springs. And they had their own glass bottom boats, etc. Try to get it without the glare on it so much. Picnic tables. This talks about the Seminole culture. This is really interesting. This shows Silver Springs. That tree is still there. I've got photos of that tree. I never knew it was that old. I mean, that's going back to the 40s at least, judging by that bathing suit. Okay, so then we're going to come over to the Silver Springs section. Silver Springs took on many different forms of presentation during its life to what it is now. And it was basically across the street, not very far from 6-gun territory. So you would have came here, you would have stayed wherever, campground, hotel, whatever was available to stay in back in those days, and you would have gone to one day and one the other, or vice, however you worked it out, you would have visited both places. These were the Silver Springs at one time was one of the most prominent, not the most prominent, tourist attraction in Florida. I mean, it's one of the places that really put Florida on the map. There were other springs, but the guys that originally owned this spring area, the spring itself and the ground around it, they just built it into an amazing attraction and brought people in. I mean, there were other springs that were equally as impressive from a natural standpoint, but none did what this guy did. So that's our tour. This is not a huge place, but it's a very significant place. So we're going to shut it down now.